Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Rausch, your own personal sales maven, here to offer you tips, strategies, and techniques to master your sales conversation. Okay, question for you. When is the last time a prospective client said to you, "This sounds interesting, but I'm not really sure how we would use that or how I might implement that or what it would take for that to happen for me? So let me think about it." Well, here's the thing. A confused mind does not buy, not because they don't want it, but because confusion, it feels risky. And the thing about confusion is there are 5 clarity killers that I have identified. There's probably more, but there's 5 that I'm going to talk about today in this particular episode that really gets in the way of you earning somebody's business. And it's important to remember that, again, confused mind doesn't buy, but really the opposite of that is clarity is kindness. If you can offer your your, proposal, your retainer, your whatever it is in a clear way, it allows for that person who's making the decision or the people making the decision to get to that decision quicker because they're not having to muddle through and make sense of things. So the thing about confusion is that it triggers overwhelm. It triggers uncertainty and it triggers decision fatigue. And anytime somebody has decision fatigue, they tend to go into like, I'll think about it later. I'll decide later. I don't want to have to do this now. So when a buyer feels unclear, they pause. And the thing about this is that when you tend to get a sense that somebody is unclear, it is super common to then over talk, to try to explain it. And you go into this explaining mode, which really that is just another way of saying you go in to try to convince mode. And the thing about sales that I've been teaching for years is your job as a seller is not to convince people. Your job is to understand, do they have a need? Do I have a solution? And do I have permission to put that in front of them? There's real clarity in if you follow those 3 things. But if you're trying to convince somebody, you've probably already lost, right? So we want to be careful about this. All right, so let me talk about the 5 clarity killers that really cause people to go into this like confused mind, not going to buy. Number 1 is you overexplain your process. You go into this, I'm going to teach them mode. I'm going to educate them mode. I've been saying for years that anytime somebody says, I don't want to have to sell, I just want to educate people, that is like a ding, ding, ding buying signal for me of like, oh, this person would be an ideal client because I can really help reframe that for them and show them when to go into more detail and when to pull back to make it easier for the buyer to make a decision. So if you find yourself in this, I've got to teach my whole method or explain my whole method before they even understand what the results are that they're going to get, you're in confusion mode. So here's what this can sometimes sound like. First, we do this, and then we're going to do that. And then there's this meeting where we're going to get together, and then we're going to have, metrics, and we're going to, blah, blah, blah. And you're like going over and over. You're in the weeds. This is also why I have been talking about this for a while now and work with my clients a lot on this of like why you can't spend so much time in the features, in the like, we're going to do this and then we're going to do that and then we're going to do this other thing and we're going to meet this many times and for this amount of time and we're going to, have this many check-ins and you're going to have this many forms to fill out. Like all of that stuff, it's just too much in the cell, like when you are in selling mode, that is too much, right? So if you find yourself doing this, it's a indicator for you of like, oh, I might be causing confusion with my potential buyers. So it's time for me to figure out what to do instead. Too much detail often triggers people to feel like they now have to analyze that information. They need to absorb that information. And it also invites people to have a response of like, I just don't have time for this. Like, I don't really even understand why all this matters. So I'm not going to even take the time to try to understand. And so of course they're not going to buy when they're in that mode. Okay, so what do you do instead? I think this is always important. What you do instead of over explaining is you lead with the outcome, you lead with the benefit. What are they going to get as a result? What's going to be the outcome? This is very NLP language. In NLP, one of the first things that we learned when I was studying at the practitioner's level is helping people get outcome focused. And it's not easy. It's not our normal way of thinking. And so if this doesn't seem natural to you, like, congratulations, you're in a very big group of elite people who are just now figuring out like it's time to start talking in outcomes. Because if people don't see the outcome, if they don't understand what the outcome is, they're less likely to buy. So we need to focus on outcomes and then maybe a short overview, a concise overview of what's included when that's needed. So think about this as you're giving information in this mode of like, I'm giving headlines, I'm not giving chapters, right? Like, is it scannable? Like, can they get just the information they need to figure out what to do next? Great. And do they understand the outcome? Like, have I articulated it clearly in a way that matters to this buyer? Great. Now I have a better chance of earning the business because it eliminates some of that confusion. So, here's some potential language you can even use. Here is, you might say, here's what changes for you when we work together. And then I'll just give you the simple path of how we get there, right? Instead of saying, let me explain my process. Now, you might have a process and it might be fantastic, and that's totally fine, but the buyer might not need to know the process. So think also, here's some language like the goal of this is X, whatever the goal is, you insert it. And the way we get there is in 3 phases. We assess, we implement, we refine. Like, simple, right? Think also, if I would call this like a messy version would be a 3-minute explanation of steps and tools. A clean version would be 20 to 30 seconds of outcomes with the 3 steps or the 5 steps. If it gets more than 5, you're probably going to cause confusion. So be clear about it. And you don't have to have 3 steps. You could have 1, you could have 2, you could have 4. Okay. But think clarity. All right. So that was number 1, clarity killer. Number 2, asking for big shifts before the value is understood. So this is for the seller who is trying to sell something that requires new behavior, new systems for the team to change what they're doing before the buyer really understands and or feels the pain of their current approach. So you might have the greatest new idea out there in your field and industry, but if nobody has any pain around it, nobody, like, the status quo is working and everything is fine, you have such an uphill battle to try to sell this. And how this usually comes out, here's some language, is like, you're going to need your team to adopt this. That is going to be like huge red flag, right, for a buyer. Or we're going to need to change all of your SOPs. Or I know this isn't how your industry does it, but if you find yourself using this type of language or versions of this, it might be time for you to take a step back and going, am I causing confusion? Because the thing about change is that people avoid it. It feels costly. Sometimes it's risky, and sometimes it's just uncomfortable. I know I've probably said this on the podcast, and I say it often when I'm teaching because I think about a teacher who used to say it to me is the only person who likes change is a wet baby. So if you're talking about change to a person who doesn't even know that they're wet in this particular case, you have a very hard sell. Um, so you want to think about that. So here's what you can do instead. You want to build awareness first. You want to qualify the cost of staying the same. You might want to start with a small win, a pilot, or like a phased rollout. There's nothing wrong with like you having the better idea or the better way. That's great. I'm talking about a confused mind doesn't buy. So, can we make the selling process easier for the buyer? So, if you can start with a small win, and I have this conversation often with clients because when we're working on their offers and they go into this mode of like, well, this is going to be 7 phases and they need all of these things in order to experience change. That like again, like my radar goes off of like, ugh, this is going to be a very hard sell. So then usually what I ask is, could we sell it in phases? Like let them have a big win in phase 1, or maybe it's phase 1 and 2 before we try to convince them that they need now the other 5 phases. Because sometimes you got to get people started so that they start to like have some change. They start to notice what's different and they're excited about it and they're ready for what's next. So sometimes you got to let people kind of dip their toe in the water. And too many times I find that consultants can be very rigid about this idea. The seller is like, nope, you got to have all 7 phases. And they come to me because they're not selling. Okay. We gotta rethink this. We gotta reframe this a little bit. You can also start with like, what is that first small step? I mentioned before in NLP, we talked about we work a lot on outcomes in the practitioner's level and helping people get their outcome that they say they want. One of the most challenging things as a NLP guide when you're working with a client is helping them figure out the first step. And when you can help people get that first step, things get so much easier. There can be momentum starting to build, mindsets start to shift. So oftentimes it's like, let's get them that first small step, and then we can work them through the other 6 phases or whatever that is in your process. So instead of saying like, here's the big change you need, you might say something like, let's start with the smallest change that creates the biggest result. Like, who doesn't want that? The smallest change that creates the biggest result? Sign me up all day long. I'm down for that. You might say, when you're talking to a prospective client, like, you don't need to overhaul everything. We're going to start with one area that creates the fastest lift, and then we'll expand from there. So I've planted the seed. There's more to come, right? But sometimes it's like we just got to get them started. So, a mini example would say like, well, we have a pilot, like let's pilot this with one department for 30 days, or let's implement this in phases so that the business doesn't feel disrupted. Right? Now people can go like, oh, I can breathe easier with that kind of language. Things get simpler. Okay. Number 3, confused mind does not buy giving too many options. Now, I know I've recorded podcasts about this. I've been talking about this a long time. Many of my clients know that I always say, like, you never give more than 3 options in a live conversation with somebody unless they dismiss all three. And then if you have something in the back pocket, you can bring, another one into the conversation. But initially, when you're laying out offers, not more than three, because a confused mind does not buy. Too many choices cause people to go into analysis mode. And this is so important. This is why, I often have to explain to clients why you don't need to have one page on your website that has every single way that somebody can buy from you. Like it's too much. Or people love these side by side charts of here's all my offers and here's the little check boxes when you buy this one versus it's not checked here because you don't get that in this offer. I despise those. I think they're really bad for selling. And yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail around that here on this podcast, but yeah, it's too many options and causes people to go ooh, I don't really know what to do with that. Remember, as the seller, it's your job to stand in your place of expertise and make a recommendation. And you don't always have to have three options. If there's one option that's the best fit, then you recommend that. So if you're, this can sound here's all the different ways that we can work together. And you give with me, there's lots of ways that you can work with me. I could probably rattle off 20 off the top of my head. But realistically, when I'm having a live conversation with somebody, I'll never give more than three. And sometimes I only say one, and sometimes I'll have two. It just depends on the conversation. You won't see me putting out offers in emails that have multiple options on them. It's like, this is the offer. It's one. So you can decide, do you want it or not? It makes it easy for the decision. And that's really all you're getting to in sales. Your job is just to help them get to the place where they can make a decision, yes or no. Okay. So what you want to do instead is think, my job when I'm having a conversation with a prospective client is to ask really smart questions so that I get the information needed so that I can make a recommendation. So think, I'm going to diagnose. I'm going to, be able to diagnose because I asked the right questions, and then I'm going to prescribe the right solution. So you're going to offer the best path, not all the paths. Okay. So instead of saying, here are all the ways that we could work together, you're going to use this language based on what you've shared. Here's one clear next step, or here's my recommendation of ways, or here's my recommendation of what's going to get you the outcome that you mentioned. I'm not going to say outcome. I'm actually going to say their outcome, right? Whatever they said. Or you could say, if there are a couple options, you might use this language. You could say, you have two paths. There's the fast support or there's pace support. Based on your timeline, my recommendation is the fast support, and here's why. Okay. So it's okay to give, again, a couple options, but it's also really important as the seller that you stand in that place of credibility and you make a recommendation and you say, my recommendation for you is this, and here's why. All right, here's number 4 of the clarity killer. It's unclear who it's for, and who it's not for. You want your buyer to be able to figure out quickly, this is for me or it's not for me. So one of the mistakes that often happens as business is we stay too broad because we don't want to exclude people. We don't want to miss out on buyers. But by being so broad, it doesn't help people go oh, she's speaking right to the heart of me. This is for me. This is for our organization. This is going to make a difference. So if you're using phrases well, I can do this with anyone, which absolutely may be true. I'm not calling into your integrity here. It's more about, are you causing confusion, or this works in all industries? If it feels generic, it's risky for the buyer often. If it can be specific feels safer because it also signals you've done this before. Like, you've helped people do this before. They have had success with this. So one of the phrases that I often encourage clients to use when they're talking about their language is like, this is for you when, and then you give a really specific bulleted list. Your ideal buyer doesn't have to meet every one of those like bulleted things on the list. But if they meet one or two, now it feels like, oh, this is for me. And you can also have, and it's not for you if, and that also builds trust, right? It's like, this is for you when these things are in place. It's not for you if these things are in place. And now it's like, oh, I can clearly identify this particular offer is for me as the buyer. So, some language swap here. Instead of like, this is for anyone who wants, that's so vague and generic. I want you to use language like, this is for you when X, Y, and Z, right? You're a great fit when you've been in business at least a year. You're excellent at what you do, and sales still feels awkward. That might be what I would use, right? Because that helps people go like, oh, well, I have been in business for a year. I am really good at what I do. And yeah, selling feels awkward. Great. Now, maybe that means when I'm ready for some sales coaching, Nikki would be the right fit for me. Okay. And then if I'm going to say, like, this isn't for you, this is not a fit if you're just looking for a quick hack. And it's also not a fit for you if you're not willing to have real conversations with people. Both of those are true, right? And if somebody's like, yeah, I am putting up a website, there are buy buttons on there, and I have no plans to ever have a live conversation with a prospective client. Like, I'm not your sales coach then. Like, I might be able to help you with some sales language, but we're like, that's not who I'm here doing what I do for. Like, great. Go find somebody else who's an expert at building these like buy pages. That's not me, right? All right, here is the fifth one. This is the fifth and last one that I'm going to talk about for the confusion, the clarity killers, I guess I should say, is when there are vague next steps or there's vague investment language. So if the buyer doesn't know what's going to happen after they say yes or what it costs, how can they possibly decide to hire you? And how this kind of shows up is instead of in a conversation with somebody giving this type of information, you say something like, well, I'll just send over some information for you to look over. Vague. Or we can talk about pricing later. No. When somebody asks you about your price, it's important that you address it. And there are ways to address it. I've done podcast episodes about this. I know I've probably shared this story before. Of one time I was having a conversation. Actually, I have a couple stories about this. Um, Probably more than a couple. When I've asked people straight up, because I just want to know, does it even make sense for us to continue this conversation? And I go, I have no idea what something like this would cost. Can you just give me a range? And they go, well, we'll get to that later. I'm like, we're probably never going to get to it because now you just gave me such a vague answer. And now I feel unsafe in the conversation. Like there's too much uncertainty there. Not good. So if a buyer is getting any kind of like, I'm not sure what's going to happen, that usually indicates like, oh, maybe there's some complexity here, or maybe there's some hidden costs that they're not going to reveal to me. And so that breaks trust and safety. And again, a confused mind does not buy. And somebody who doesn't know what's going to happen or doesn't understand what's involved here, not going to buy. So what are you going to do instead? You're going to make the path obvious. So the decision, payment, onboarding, first step, timeline, like make that stuff clear. Make sure you give an investment anchor. If somebody's asking about price, you don't maybe we don't have enough information to give them a hard price, but you can give a range. I get pushback on this one a lot. People go, no, I can't, Nikki. I can't give a range. Yes, you absolutely can. And I don't care how big the range is, but if you don't give a range, it it essentially sends the message that you're dismissing that person's question. So here's what you might say. You might say, to move forward, we do two things today. We choose your start date and we handle payment. And then you receive onboarding within the next 24 hours. And then we begin with our first session, right? Like super clear, easy for them to know. Or the investment is X. Is that something you'd like to move forward with? Or the investment ranges between X and Y. And in order to give you a specific quote for your project, is it okay if I ask a few more quick questions, right? Like give some clarity so they understand what's going to happen. All right. So I want to give you a little mini framework that I think hopefully will be easy for you to implement here. So this is something that you can repeat. You can use it immediately in your sales calls. Think about having these 5 things included when you are trying to improve clarity. Number 1, outcome. What's going to change? Number 2, who? Like, this is for you when language. Number 3, that there is a simple path to getting their outcome. So you might say something like, there are 3 phases, or we start with phase 1 to achieve XYZ, right? Number 4, recommendation. Based on what you shared, my recommendation for you is X. And then number 5 is next steps. Here's what happens now. So outcome, who, simple path, recommendation, and next step. Now you've got this 5 little mini framework here that you can implement to help bring clarity so that the decision maker can make a decision. Okay, so let me give you an example of using all of these 5 in just a few short sentences. I might say, so the outcome is X, whatever they have said their outcome that they're looking to achieve. And this is for you when, insert. The path for this is we break down your selling process and the 5 steps for a successful sales conversation. And based on what you've shared, my recommendation is, say what it is. And the next step is for us to book your first session on the calendar. And then this takes it outside the 5, but it's really important that you do this piece too. And that's that you follow up with an invitation. So are you ready to get started? Right? Like we have to help the confused mind make a decision. And the way that people are going to make decisions is you pose the question, you issue close language. All right. So I know that was a lot. This is probably more than I normally give in an episode, but I wanted to just really break down this and the importance of the confused mind. And I was having a conversation with somebody recently about this, and they were explaining a challenge that one of their clients was having. And the thing that I said is like, we could tell right off the bat, like why this person is struggling with closing any sales. And it's because they were asking too many changes. There needed to be too many changes before the person really understood there was a problem. And one of the indicators was it's like, this has to happen and this has to happen. And then this other thing has to happen and this other thing needs to happen. And I was like, first of all, you just gave me like 4 ands. And if there's that many ands in there, that's not a clear outcome. And without a clear outcome, like people are going to have a hard time making a decision. And then I said, a confused mind doesn't buy. And the person came back and was like, oh my gosh, Nikki, like, you have to do a podcast about this because people aren't thinking about this. And yet clarity is kindness. Clarity makes it easy for the other person to make a decision. And that is what I am wishing and hoping for you. So here's my challenge, if you're willing to accept it. Pick one of these clarity killers that I addressed, one of the 5 here, and fix it this week. And if you're not sure how to fix it, then let's jump on a call and talk about ways to work together so that we can get this fixed for you. Because sometimes it's these tiny little adjustments that make all the difference. I cannot tell you how many times I have worked with a client and just identified quickly of like, oh, let's just change this one little way that you're phrasing this, or let's clarify your offer here, or let's start with this as the kind of go-to offer. And people are like, oh, that's what I needed. And everything shifts. I know I was just having a conversation, or I just heard from a client not too long ago who was a client about 5 years ago now. And she likes to update me on how awesome things are going. And when we started, it was like this was the prime example of a confused mind. When she was having her initial calls with people, there was so much confusion. One, their initial calls were sometimes taking 2 hours, so that was not okay. We got that initial call down to 20 minutes, and it was the first time that she was getting payment. Like people were actually paying her at the end of a 20-minute conversation and like paying, like hiring her for her services. And she just shared with me again, like, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, sent a message going like, I am still using the exact same format. And she had shared the results of how the growth of her business, like unbelievable growth. Sometimes it's the smallest little things. You make it easy for people to buy from you, they're more likely to say yes. All right. I'm wishing you continued success. Thank you so much. If you made it all the way to the end of this episode, I'm so grateful you're here. And share. I want to know, what is the one thing you're going to fix this week? Reach out. I'd love to hear from you. All right. Wishing you continued success. Thanks for being here.